Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. This is Kate, your host and owner of 123 Limited. One of my favorite dirty words is accountability. Ironically, though, one of the phrases I can't stand is hold accountable. First, let's all agree that accountability is not a bad thing, but our understanding of it and its role in the workplace is pretty broken. Over the years, it's become synonymous with punishment, and this is a big problem because true accountability exists in trusting and authentic relationships, in clear communication, and shared expectations. When leaders get great at creating accountability with their teams, great results are sure to follow. I could go on and on and on about why accountability is essential to performance, why it depends on your ability to build strong relationships with the people around you, and how it only exists within the ongoing performance-focused communication between a leader and an employee. And that's why I'm excited to talk with today's guest, who told me that he loves talking about accountable results. Wayne, thank you for joining me. I'd like to take a moment and let my guest introduce themselves first, please.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm excited for this conversation today. I know we were chatting a little bit ahead before we hit record, and we're going to talk about some topics that I'm super excited about and very passionate about as well. So I think this can be a fun conversation. But to introduce myself, I am a husband, a father of 4 amazing kids. I know that's what everyone says about their kids, and we all believe it to be true. My oldest is 17. My youngest is 11. So 3 boys, and the 11-year-old baby is the girl. And she routinely beats up her brothers and makes sure that they are all in line and doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Good girl.
That's the way it works. Yeah. I founded this company called Ugly Mug Marketing about 15 and a half years ago. We are a full service marketing agency with clients in about 34 states right now. That fluctuates a little bit, obviously, throughout the year. At any point in time, we have roughly 100 to 120 clients that we're actively working with.
Well, I'm really glad to have you join me. I think this is the first time I've sat down and talked with somebody in marketing as a guest. So I'm interested to see how that background and some of your other experience as a small business owner will play into things in our conversation. So predictably, for people that have been listening to the podcast for any length of time, I typically like to start with defining what we mean. The meanings of words, definitions, shared understanding is really important to me. So if we're going to talk about accountability, I think we need to define what we mean by accountability in the workplace. I'd love to hear how you talk about it.
Absolutely. I think that, first of all, accountability in and of itself is foundational in any organizational culture, whether you're for-profit,
100%.
not-for-profit, and in a lot of ways, not to go back to family, but it's an important element in family dynamics and relationships, in the family setting, I guess you will. But for us, the way we like to talk about and define accountability is really about honoring your word and ensuring that your word or your words and your actions are in alignment. And it's that simple and that complex all at the same time.
I love that. The way I've thought about accountability, and I've had the opportunity to put a lot of thought into this, both personally, but also professionally from an organizational development and learning perspective, had the chance to do like whole conferences and training on the subject. Where I've landed is that there's the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, knowing that you will make an account for your actions. So what you say and what you do, have they been accounted for? Will they tick and tie with each other? There's a sense of reconciliation. But the thing that I believe is so important, especially for leaders, because I think leaders are kind of the seat of where accountability begins in the workplace, is that it is a process. It is not a one-time thing. I said in my intro that I cannot stand the term hold accountable.
Yeah.
And in no small part because it makes it an event and it's often too late. By that point, people don't really have an idea of what expected of them.
Yep.
So I just get up on my soapbox and sound the gong for ongoing process of how we talk about what we're going to get done. Totally dependent on clear expectations, totally dependent on ongoing, consistent, transparent communication. Now, you talk about self-accountability, which I like, and I'm curious how it's different from the other flavors of accountable behavior that are kind of implicit in what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to self accountability and just the whole conversation around quote unquote being held accountable, I think from a societal perspective, we here, particularly in the West and specifically in the United States, we grow up in a society where from a very early age, we are held accountable, if you will, by other figures, authority figures. So our parents hold us accountable to clean our room. Our teachers, in some aspects, hold us accountable for studying, getting good grades, taking the test. And oftentimes those two forces, parents, caregivers, and teachers come together in unison to attempt to hold us accountable for maybe lackluster performance on our grades. So we go through this entire early stages of development into high school and then into college, where for a lot of us, that is where we get, our training to enter into the workplace, if you will.
Yes.
And what's so fascinating is when we come out of that, one of the things that's an undertone is we are ready to be out from under other people's, I'm going to use the word authority, but out from other people's accountability. That's really what I believe is at the core of it.
Okay.
We are ready to be free from that. We want to only have to give account to ourselves. And what I think happens is when we enter the workplace at large has attempted to mirror what takes place in school, what takes place in family relationships, where it is a very much a top-down approach where I'm going to hold you accountable as if we are still a child or as if we are still in this training period. So, if you really think about the way that we are brought up, regardless of how you're brought up, we're brought up under this accountability structure. And most often it is imposed, right? We have no choice. And so when we enter the workplace, I believe there's this undertone for most people that they're ready to be free from that. And yet they get there, and we often find that people get treated as if they have no brain, they can't make a decision on their own, and that there's going to be some force, whether it's a leader, a manager, a HR department, or whatever it may be, that is going to impose this accountability onto us. And so I think by default, the way the system has defaulted, there's already conflict that exists between these two relationships. So that is where I think, first of all, from just a mental perspective, I think as leaders, if you're in an organization, you have to approach it through that lens that, yes, that is the way we've been taught, we've been trained and quote unquote conditioned, if you will. But just because that was the training, that doesn't mean that that is the way we expect as adults to have to live our lives. And so I think that's what creates so often this pushback and this almost rebellion against this notion of being held accountable. No one likes to hear those terms. No one wants to think of that, think of their boss or their manager as someone who's going to hold me accountable.
I mean, I think this is really similar to the conversation that I've had many times around the concept of empowerment. It's what is the source of power? to whom are you having to make an account? And it varies so much. When you talked about these accountable structures like parents or teachers, other authority figures. So here's the thing. I think you and I have come to the same place, but by different paths. That's where I think the heart of our conversation is probably going to be, because when you talked about like parents and teachers being these authority figures, the distinction I make is there's still a need for clear expectations there. If a parent is, asking you to do your chores, or you're being held accountable, quote unquote, for chores, but you haven't been told what they are or equipped to do them, that's not parenting so much as kind of bullying, a very emotionally charged word these days. If a teacher doesn't set clear assignments, well, where does the accountability come in? If I don't know what I'm expected to do, I can't be held accountable for that. In the workplace, if people are free to have their own authority, if they've grown up through a school structure, even home structures that have that authority figure, and you are the child, subject to that authority, when you get into the workplace, how will people know that they're free to take their own authority? Mm-hmm. Question I have. And yes, I can be accountable for myself. I can be self-directed. I can be self-empowered. But unless someone tells me this is the set of circumstances, this is the way we work, this is our culture, I'm going to flounder in that case. So like I said, I don't think we're talking about divergent approaches. I think it's more where we put the locus of responsibility. Does that make sense?
It does. And I completely agree. So coming back, kind of, I guess, putting a bow on it like you did, is this, that when people enter the workforce or the workplace, we've grown up with that structure. Let's just use school, for example, with a very clear set of expectations. Report card comes out every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and the report card across the board is uniform. There's grades, A, B, C, D, F, like that. That's it. Mm-hmm. And those little things that go in the little boxes or on the paper or wherever you're seeing the report card, those individual letters tell an entire story. Now, you may feel it's not an accurate story. You may feel this, whatever it may be, but there's very clear, crystal clear expectations about how your performance will be judged. Mm-hmm. And the judgment comes, if you will, on specific days. The analysis of your performance comes on very specific days, and it has very clear meaning behind what is there. And so to your point, when people do enter the workplace, I think there's these two opposing things. One is we think we are ready for the freedom. We don't want the authority over us. We don't want to, quote unquote, be held accountable, but we've grown up in a system that has given us that, right? And so, like you said, in order for us to thrive, that has to exist. But where I think so many organizations mess up is they don't know how to paint those pictures, to create the clear boxes, and then get out of the way, allow people to use their own brains, their own gifts and abilities to execute. And I think that is where the rub comes in for so many organizations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We're back on the same page. Not that we ever weren't, but
yeah,
we're on the same line of the same page now. I agree with you probably 1,000% here that yes, when people enter the workforce, what they generally crave and what workplaces generally need from them is to function with a certain level of autonomy. My HR self has to say it's, somewhat role or job dependent, industry dependent, but we need that kind of, here's how you need to function. And that happens through the communication of the organization, usually in the form of a leader saying, this is how we do it. We have to prepare people because they don't always come to us equipped to function with autonomy or independence or self-accountability into our environment. And that can be the last agency I was at didn't do it this way. All right, well, let's show you the ropes. It comes down basically to how do we onboard and orient people?
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think by default, and especially as you move up into larger organizations, so often we inherit what other people, other organizations are doing as the right way of doing it. So take, for example, I'm just going to pull this one out because it's top of mind, but performance reviews. So performance reviews started after World War II. Now, they actually started in the military before that, but they gained a foothold in American business, culture, community after World War II. And they basically took the military's performance rating system and adapted it to business settings. Well, fast forward now, however many years we are past that, and for most organizations, they're still defaulting to a system and a process that was put in place back then. And sure, it's been adapted, it's been adjusted, the questions change a little bit and all of those things. But what I believe to be true is that when we have pieces and systems in place, like I'm just going to, again, pick on performance reviews, we assume that we are doing the role of what you just talked about, telling people what's expected, telling them, within obviously the roles and the parameters, and then setting them free to go do that. And in reality, I've witnessed that so often people don't even understand, and I'm going to use some cliche words here, but they don't understand the vision. Like, where are we going in the future? What are we trying to create? The mission, like, why do we even care? Why do we exist? Like, why do we want to accomplish this vision that we set out to accomplish? Then there's no clearly defined, and this is a whole side topic here, core values. So most organizations have them. Most of them are nothing more than platitudes, and I think there's reasons for that, but there's no clear core values. And then there's no clear expectations. And so when you're lacking, in my opinion, these things, there are no guardrails for people to operate within. And I use that metaphorically. So imagine that our goal is to get to the top of the mountain. That's our vision. We want to be at the top of the mountain. We have a very important reason why, whatever that reason may be. That's our mission to make that happen. It's a mistake to then just turn people loose and say, get us to the top of the mountain. Some people are going to run off the side of the mountain, off the cliff. Other people are going to run into the side of the mountain, right? They're going to hit the actual side of the mountain. And so I view all of these things as guardrails that just say, look, here's how we know we're on the right path. Here's some things to look for, signposts, to ensure that we're heading the right direction. And it's within those things, when those things are in place, that you can create the autonomy. You can allow that freedom to take place.
Wayne, I don't know that I can agree any more than I already have. I do have to say that I am repeatedly just gobsmacked that organizations will go through all the effort of establishing mission, vision, values, behavior standards, all of those, what are like essential check the box things to be a business, and then they don't use them in how they help people perform. It's like, why bother being clear about your purpose, setting a picture of the future in place so we know what we're striving for, talking about what's important, what our promise is to how we behave with each other, and then being really clear about how all of that plays out in our day-to-day if you're not going to constantly communicate it with folks. You mentioned inherited. I think there's often this assumption that people come into a new organization, a new role, and they just somehow, whether it's through osmosis or magic, they just know everything. about that company, about the role. It's befuddling how smart business people can do something that's so short-sighted.
I agree. It's a huge mistake. And I think part of that, and again, I'm going to speak here more towards smaller businesses. But one of the things I see happen over and over again is they hire in a hurry, right? So it's like, we need somebody, we desperately need somebody. So, here's a good applicant or a decent applicant. Let's get them in, get them rolling. So the person shows up on a Monday for their new job, and it's like, here's your computer, get busy, right? Get started. And like you said, in different contexts, but that is so short-sighted. The way you begin that relationship, in my opinion, sets a tone that is extremely difficult to ever go back and change again. Once that tone is set, I mean, the old adage, first impressions, right? Once you have those first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever that may be, that is where you set the tone and the direction for the rest of that person's time with you. And because so many business owners, small organizations, they hire so quickly, they hire out of desperation and throw people into a role. And it's not that the person is the person probably is very technically capable, right? Resume wise, they matched with what's needed, but there's so much more that has to be in alignment besides, can they do the thing we hired them to do? If we're going to build a truly, what I would call, self-accountable culture.
Wayne, I could talk your ear off about this particular topic, about hiring and talent selection. What I will say is that type of onboarding experience at best is short-sighted. Most commonly, though, it's careless and cruel, that we just don't think of the needs of the other person, and then they become, unfortunately, accountable to a broken process, a broken understanding. And it's kind of no wonder that we have so many workforce problems these days, because what you talked about is common not just in small businesses. I can tell you from personal experience, it happens in big businesses as well. Yeah. That, we got to get some, the butts and seats approach to hiring. It kills people's spirit. It kills productivity.
Yeah. When you treat people as if they're nothing more than cogs in a wheel, cogs in a machine, then you shouldn't complain nor be frustrated when that is the way they act. Right? When you treat people as human beings and you understand, and to your point, like, we have a long way to go. Like, we work on this when we hire people, but one of the questions we ask is, how is this person going to feel on their first day here? Right? For us, it's just another day at the office. For us, it's another day. Yes, there's a new person here, but it's just it's normal. The office is normal. The rooms are normal. Everything's normal. For them, this is all new. So where's the bathroom? Where are the restaurants around the office? Where's the printer? You know what I mean? Like, little basic things. And again, if we switch our mindset to, these aren't just cogs in a wheel. And I will tell you from personal experience, I even hate to admit this, Kate, but I spent probably the first 7 years of this business viewing people as a necessary evil. I mean, that was my mentality.
That can happen sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, I wanted to grow the agency. I had to have people to do it. Therefore, it was a liability. And what I believe to be true today is, our workforce, our team members, are a business's number one asset. So how would you take care of the number one asset? And I'm using strictly financial terms, which I typically don't talk this way, but it's mentally it paints a picture.
And
it paints a picture, though, of just my mindset has gone from necessary evil to this is the lifeblood of the company.
What changed for you, Wayne?
So I had a very interesting experience take place probably 7-ish years into this business. So a friend of mine had a company. He had a couple of employees, and he came to me and he said, I'm thinking of selling the company. I've got an offer for the business, and I'm tired, honestly, of the headaches of dealing with my staff, dealing with my team. Mm. And unfortunately, this is a common occurrence. Yeah. And sadly, it's a very common topic amongst entrepreneurs. And I'll illustrate that here in just a second. So I was part of an entrepreneurial mastermind group, and we meet once a month for lunch. And there was always a short lesson, and then everyone would discuss that topic. So I invite my friend to come with me to that lunch, and we go in the room, and as luck would have it, that day was the topic for the day was your team, building your team, how to have a thriving team. And so one of the questions that they always started with was introduce yourself, introduce your business. And then the question we had to answer that day was, how many people work for you, work in your company? And so we're going around the room, and there's one entrepreneur in the room at the time who at that time had 700 employees, extremely successful business, by far, quote unquote, the most successful in the room. So it's coming around, it's getting to him, everyone's listening, gets to him, and he says his name, he says his company name, and then he says, in terms of how many people work for me, it's usually about half of them. And so everyone erupts in laughter because he's making this joke about half the staff shows up, but they don't actually work. The other half work sometimes. Mm. For the next hour, the entire conversation was centered around how terrible employees are, how terrible it is to have to deal with them, how terrible it is to, they're entitled, just all the negatives that you could think. And so at the time, to be honest with you, I shared somewhat of that sentiment, right? That was the mindset I had at that time. So we come out of that meeting, and a little bit later that afternoon, my friend calls me and he said, well, I made my decision. I'm like, well, what's that? He said, I'm selling the company. He's like, if this is what I have to look forward to, there's no way that I want to continue growing the company and add more team members because it's just going to be a headache. And in that moment, I don't know exactly what happened, but it was like, the old, super cheesy to say this, but it's like the world stops for a minute, like everything just gets silent. Yes. And it's like just the piercing words. And in that moment, what I realized was I was on that same path. I was down this path where the entrepreneur who I mentioned, very successful business, he had been in business at that point, probably 22 years, something like that. And at the time, I'd been in this company for 7 years. So it hit me like, this is the path I'm on. Like, this is where I'm going to end up. I'm going to end up down in the future at some point, and I'm going to hate my team. I'm going to view them as, again, quote unquote, necessary evil, all this stuff. And it was in that moment that I said, but that is a choice. That is a choice, because I know there are organizations, I knew other entrepreneurs who loved their teams, who had amazing cultures. And it was that moment that I decided to become very intentional about shifting the culture. And that started first and foremost with my mindset.
One of the things that in industry I've seen and been personally frustrated by, and not because I'm perfect, but because I've made some of the mistakes myself and had to learn because of those moments where everything kind of stills and you go, oh, oops, I can be different. It's what I've talked about as designing for the lowest common denominator. Mm-hmm. That we assume as leaders, as human resources people, as coaches, anybody that has responsibility for providing an employee experience of some sort, that people have bad intent, that they're going to make bad choices, that they don't care about their work. We always lower to the level of, well, these people suck and they're trying to make my life difficult. And then all of our processes, our policies, our interactions are predicated on this idea that people are bad. I used to work for a company that had, more than 10,000 employees, and the joke I would make is, there are more than 10,000 of us, there are probably one or two bad people there. But everybody's joined this company knowingly. They're dedicated to the mission, or at least they're dedicated to getting a paycheck. Maybe we treat them with some dignity and respect for that, and we don't design our policies, our procedures in a way that treats them like children. And that connects back to what you said. We do approach it like your school children who don't know what you're doing yet.
Yeah.
Such a disservice.
Absolutely. And to what you just said, the phrase that it served me well, and it still serves me well, what you focus on expands.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in that mindset that, they were needy, they were entitled, they were whatever those words were, right? They were problems. The more I focused on that, the more problems I found, the more issues I found, because that is what I was looking for. That is what I believed to be true. And I wish I could say it's as easy as you just flip the switch and you focus on the positive, the good, and you will discover more good and more positive. And that is certainly true. Like, if you focus on finding the good in people, if you focus on finding how they serve well, how they show up well, if you focus on those things, you find more of it. But from my experience, there wasn't just an immediate, in an instant, flip the switch. It was a slow process. It was a gradual process. And here's the most fascinating part of this whole thing to me. My company went from having a team of employees who were ungrateful, entitled, just problems, constant problems, couldn't do anything on their own, came to me with every single thing, to over the course of a couple years became super, super productive, like A players, like people constantly trying to recruit them away from me. And here's the most fascinating part. These were the same people.
Oh, right.
These were the same people. The staff hadn't changed. It was the same team members I had 2 years prior. What changed was me.
Mm-hmm.
What changed was the way I chose to view things. And obviously it's not just all about viewing things differently. There's things that got put in place, like getting crystal clear about where are we going? What is that vision?
Well,
how do we communicate that?
Even some of that is I don't see you as a problem. I see you as somebody that I'm working alongside. So let me equip you.
Exactly it. I mean, it's to the point now where I even hate the word employee. Mm-hmm. Like, it's hard for me to even say that word because I don't view them as that. Yes, I'm the one who signs the paycheck. Yes, I'm the one, it's my responsibility to make sure, quote unquote, everyone gets paid. But I don't view them as that. I view them as a teammate, someone who is along beside me, not someone who's beneath me, not someone I'm, quote unquote, responsible for, but they're alongside me. They're a teammate along with me. So I would just encourage anyone listening that if you feel like you're in that spot where, you may hear this and you may think, yeah, but you don't understand the people I've got, or yeah, but any of those things come to mind. I was there. Like, when I first had that epiphany and I looked around at the entrepreneurs and the people I knew with amazing teams, amazing culture, the thing that kept going through my head was, yeah, but you don't understand. I'm in a small town. There's not a lot of great talent. Yeah, but I don't have big budgets to pay big salaries. Yeah, but so there's this long list of excuses. Mm-hmm. And I had to personally work through those to realize that they're nothing more than excuses, that you have the power to create the culture that you want. And the budget doesn't matter. There's a lot of really amazing nonprofit organizations who have the most passionate, dedicated people working for them who are volunteers, who don't get paid a dime. And if they can do it, if they can centralize people around a mission and a purpose for no money, we have no excuse when we have money to actually give people in an effort to, support their lives.
You're talking about something that's just a universal truth. People we behave the way we're treated. There are exceptions, always exceptions, but if you treat me like a child, how am I going to act? I'm going to act like a child. We respond to how people come at us. It's human nature. It's born and bred into us. And as we've stated a couple of times, how can we blame people for behaving as if they are a necessary evil when that's how they're treated?
Yep.
So where does it change? There is an essential paradox in leadership. It's the way I think of it is when you answer the question, who works for whom, when you think about a leader and an employee, it's both. Yes, the employee looks to the leader for leadership, management, clear expectations, resources, feedback, all those juicy things. But in many ways, at the end of the day, the leader works for the employee or the team because they need to be there to set those expectations, to ensure that there are resources available for people, that they're cared for, frankly.
Yeah, I think we get lost sometimes in that. We all, regardless of role, regardless of the size of the organization, we all have so many different, plates, if you will, we're trying to keep spinning, or, things we've got on our plates that we're trying to tend to, that it's so easy to lose sight of what matters most. And I don't know any real organizations out there that the people aren't the most important thing in the organizations, but it's so easy to be distracted by the million other things coming our way that we do lose sight of that. And I completely agree that, the whole idea of servant leadership, that the higher up you go, it's not the more people serve you, it's the more people you have to serve.
Yeah. Well, anytime a leader doesn't approach it, whether you call it servant leadership or transformational leadership, or this is how I show up to work, that you have more potential, well, frankly, to end up in the headlines as a problem if you aren't viewing that entire population of people as the folks that you're there to lead, to serve, to care for, and that the work only happens if they exist. I do see a lot of leaders that lose sight of that you're not doing the day-to-day work. That's your team. None of this stuff would happen. Productivity, customer service, marketing, without the people.
Yep.
There's a reason you have a team, because you
Yep.
can't do it all. You said something about, focus on what matters. Ideally, you have your guardrails in place. You have your mission, your vision, your values, your shared behaviors, all of those cultural elements that should serve as your North Star.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna circle way back to values. I kind of mentioned earlier when I said values, I said most organizations, their values are nothing more than platitudes, hanging on a wall. Maybe they have them creatively done on a wall somewhere. But what I've learned to be true about values is this, that a value isn't a value until it costs you something. So I can say all day long that we value people, like people first. But until that value actually costs me something as a leader, it's not a value. It's merely a good feeling word, something that sounds good. Same thing with another example, create remarkable experiences is one of our core values. We could talk about all day long how important that value is and how, we believe in creating remarkable experiences, but until it actually costs us something. In other words, we have to make a decision that is, do we forfeit some profit to create this experience? Do we, work overtime to create this experience? Until those things actually cost us something, they're not true values for us. They're just words.
Yeah. I love that understanding that the things we say are important have worth. So tell me, what are some of the things that you do with your team? How do you ensure and sustain accountability and make it possible for people to be self-accountable?
I think one of the very first things that we do, although I wouldn't have necessarily thought of this as a way that we help foster self accountability, the very first conversation that I have with a new hire once they come into the company is a whole conversation around trust and suspicion. Okay. And what I talk about is that most organizations, call it Western culture, call it just the way we are as humans, we tend to default to suspicion. In other words, I'm not going to trust you. You're going to have to earn my trust. And that is the way so many organizations operate. That's the way you see it from, like you were saying earlier, they treat people like children. They treat them as if they're guilty, and they have to constantly earn trust. And so the conversation goes like this. We, by default, start with trust. We've hired you, we've vetted you, you've been through the whole interview process. You wouldn't be sitting in the chair today if we didn't trust you. If we didn't believe in you as a person, we didn't believe you were aligned with our values, all the stuff. Our default is trust. You have to earn suspicion here. Very different from other organizations where you have to work to build trust. Here, you have to earn suspicion. The way that happens, which we don't want that to happen, but the way that happens is when your words don't align with your actions, whether that's explicit words or implicit words. So, and then I dive into the whole explanation. The difference is there's some implied things, right? You are here. You've seen our core values. You've been through this. You've seen our vision, our mission. You know where we're going. You've even seen our expectations. We show everybody the expectations, way before they get to the offer part of the job process.
Great.
So you already know all these things. And so the fact that you're sitting in this chair implies, it's implicit, you've communicated to me that you understand these things and you're willing to uphold these things. There's a whole conversation pre-hire where we, ask, like, go through this. Is there anything here that you would be uncomfortable with, that you don't feel you could live up to? So we talk about that. And we just say, there will be occurrences. It's going to happen where you give your word and then your actions are not going to align with that through circumstance, through whatever it may be. You overcommitted, whatever it may be, it's going to happen. The question is, what are you going to do about it? In that moment, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to own that? Are you going to acknowledge that? Are you going to bring it forward? Or in most organizations, what would happen is you would sweep it under the rug and hope no one notices. Here, you're never going to be criticized. You're never going to be punished for bringing something to our attention that you screwed up on. And I could go down this whole rabbit trail on this one, but I'm just going to say it now. I'll keep it short, but one of the things I think so many leaders mess up on is they do not allow their team members to make mistakes. They do not allow their team members to fail. You have to, as a leader, be willing to watch your team members fail, even when you could step in and prevent the failure. Now, I'm not talking about catastrophic failures here. I'm not talking about, the world's going to end type of things. I'm talking about just little failures. There's so many failures that take place. And so often leaders step in and prevent the failure. And so what we do from doing that, number one, we frustrate ourselves as leaders because we think this person shouldn't be making this mistake. I shouldn't be having to jump in and fix this. But number two is we train the other person to not think for themselves, to know that there's a safety net there to catch them. And again, it's not an absolute, right? Obviously, if there's a major failure, jump in, save it, obviously, but allow your people to fail. And then don't just tell them how to fix the failure, coach them through with questions. Oh, so, you just sent out an email to 5,000 people and the subject line was wrong, like typo in the subject line. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? Don't tell them, never send out another email. Don't tell them. You ask questions, you coach them through it. So did you follow the process? Let's pull it out, So usually, and it goes back, again, I'm going down a rabbit trail here, but.
Oh no, I love it. I'll bring us back because I see a beautiful connection here. It's a good trail.
Yeah. what I would say is this, that, I never criticize a person. I always criticize a system or process. Right. And now, if the person didn't follow the system or process, that's just a conversation around, look where we ended up. You sent an email to 5,000 people with a typo in the subject line. You told me that you skipped the part where you're supposed to send it to somebody to proof it. So what do we need to do to ensure this doesn't happen again? That's it. That's the conversation. So I went down a rabbit trail. I got off on that slight tangent, but those are some tactical things that I see that I've had to really work hard
Wayne,
on.
I love this because you are starting from this absolutely pure and solid place that even the implicit things are made clear at that point of hire. As somebody is joining the team, and it sounds like even during your interviewing and kind of onboarding process, never mind once they're signed on, that you're constantly saying, hey, here's the invisible made visible. And let's be very clear that by saying yes to the job, which encompasses all these things, the culture, the expectations, the discrete role responsibilities, being a member of this team, by saying yes, we have become mutually accountable to each other. That's all the before, that's the expectation setting. Then there's the during. And I will not get us into performance reviews, but that's how are we doing feedback? Are we updating? Are we being clear? Are we providing progress? It's the doing of work. And then whatever result you get, there's kind of an after. And that's where another dirty word comes up, and that's the idea of consequences. That because we know people are going to make mistakes, people are going to have errors. There's a reason we call it human error. We have to be prepared for consequences. And consequences are not bad. If you break it down to the actual meaning of the word, con means with, and sequence is that. It's the sequence of events. So a consequence is something that just follows with the events. And it could be something like a corrective action, or worst case scenario, you lose your job. But it can also be, I get an atta girl, or I get a pay raise, or I get a promotion. And that being clear about the balance is behavior and consequence is so important. In your case, I make a mistake and I send an email out the wrong way. I didn't follow our procedure. Well, the consequence is I get coaching about that. It's commiserate with what happens, especially if it's the first time, right?
Yep.
But you don't make a big deal of it. You move on because people make mistakes, and we've built in ways to manage that.
Yeah. And the conversation escalates based on repeat, quote unquote, offense. Mm-hmm. So the first time, it's just a conversation.
Right.
So tell me what happened. Tell me how we ended up sending the email with a typo in the subject line. Mm-hmm. So we then find that they didn't follow the process. So let's say it's a month later, same person, same thing happens again. Exactly. It's the same conversation. So we had this conversation a month ago. You'd mentioned that the process wasn't followed. You said in our conversation that, it was just a matter of you're going to put the procedure up on your desk, so you made sure to follow it each time. What happened? Like, how did we get here? So we have that conversation again. But this time the conversation, like you just said, is probably a little bit different of a conversation. It's again, I view it as coaching. I mean, that's what I view it as. Like the person, unless this is 1 in 1,000 people, unless the person just intentionally is trying to do something to try, it's probably not 1 in 1,000, but it's so minute. Still. Like most people show up wanting to do a good job. Like mm-hmm. People don't show up to work thinking, how can I screw things up today? Right? They show up wanting to actually do a great job for us. Yeah. And so we have to have that mindset when those situations occur. We have to come at it from that mindset. Like, this person didn't intend to send another email with a typo. Like, no. Yeah.
Like you said, there's frequency. Is it the first time it's happened, or is it the 17th? What's the severity of it? Then there's also what's the impact. of it. And based on that, you kind of scale your response, always taking into account what else could be around the person that's enabling or disenabling them.
And oftentimes you uncover other parts of a process that are broken. So if we use Joe's email example, let's say that Joe did follow the process. He sent the email over to someone to proof and check, but the person didn't respond in a timely manner. And Joe didn't want to get the other person in trouble, but Joe had to get the email out on this date for this time for the sale or whatever it may be. So he just said, I'm not going to point them out. I'm just going to send it out and hope it's all well. So again, it's our job to investigate, to dig in, because again, people want to do a good job. And our job, I view it as just that. It's a coach. It's to help them be the best version of themselves they can be.
A leader is somebody that, I'm not one for aphorisms, but it is somebody that shows the way. You are guiding people. So whether you say coach or guide or support, that by saying yes, becoming accountable in a leadership role, one of the accountabilities you have is to setting and indicating the path for your people.
Yep.
And then there's a concept that I learned from the Crucial Learning folks in, I think the program is called Vital Accountability now. It used to be called Crucial Confrontations. I'll look that up and I'll reference it later, but it's this idea of a fundamental attribution error, that we make this mistake, and humans do this as an act of, frankly, of self-protection, but we make this error of attributing bad intent to people. And we think that the only reason something doesn't go well is because of bad motive. And again, it's the amygdala seeing everything as a threat to keep us safe. But we have to, particularly in leadership roles where we're responsible for other people's performance, and by extension, well-being, we have to say, what else could cause a reasonable person to do or not do the thing? And it may be that they have bad motivation. They're tired of the process and they just don't want to do it anymore. But that's so rare. It could be they were never trained. They don't have the skill or ability to do it. It could be, as you pointed out, other people who aren't doing the stuff that they need to do or who aren't providing the necessary support. You have to critically think about, what is the thing that I'm really addressing? Because if this is the other thing, when we talk about accountability, it's a two-way street. If you are accountable employee, then leader, I am accountable as well for the full environment of how you work and how I treat you as you're doing that work. And personally, I think the larger part of that accountability sits with the leader.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's an analogy I use when I think about leadership. It's that I grew up in kind of rural Louisiana, and agriculture is a big thing here. Livestock is a big thing. And I took agriculture in high school for all 4 years and actually really enjoyed the classes. But one of my teachers, he raised sheep and subsequently had border collies to herd the sheep.
Yeah.
And so we would go once a year to his house, his farm, if you will, and he would do like a demonstration with his sheep. And I don't know if you've ever seen a border collie do its job with sheep, but it is the most amazing and beautiful thing you'll ever see.
Isn't it?
Yeah, they run behind the sheep, sometimes barking, but oftentimes not even barking. They run back and forth, side to side, and they gently steer the sheep where the sheep need to go. So when I think of leadership and I think of my role as a leader, that is the mindset that I like to think of. I like to think of my job is to be behind the scenes, gently steering people, the team, where we need to get to. They're the ones out front. They're the ones doing the stuff. But subsequently, this is just a personal thing for me. Um, I want them to get to be the stars. When things are going well, I want them to get the accolades, them to get the recognition, them to, be in the spotlight, if you will. So when people compliment me on the business or success or whatever those things may be, I try to pinpoint it back to a person or a team or people on the team to give them, because they're the ones doing it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just gently in the back, nudging and steering. But the flip side of this is true as well. And I see this with other entrepreneur, leaders. When things are going bad, what often happens is the people, the team, get shoved out in the front. In other words, the problems are here and they get shoved out in the front. And what I like to think of it as, when things are not going well, my job as a leader is to actually become a bodyguard. I have to push through the crowd. I have to make a way through the mess to lead the team through. It's not my job to, when things get terrible, to constantly pile more pressure on the team and say, y'all figure this out. Y'all lead the way. Y'all drive through all this mess. It's the opposite. When things are great, mm-hmm. I'm in the back just gently steering and nudging, allowing them to shine, allowing them to do their things. But when things are bad, it's the opposite approach. Like, I have to take the charge, take the lead, if you will, and take all the things head on.
This goes back to what you said, Wayne, about criticizing process, not people. Mm. And the leaders that have, I'm going to be definitive and probably a little judgmental myself, the leaders that have their hearts right, who recognize that processes fail more than people, even though there's human error, we account for that and we look at the process around them. The leaders that have their heart right and they see themselves as shepherding and guiding, they're going to say, how do I protect you from what's not going well? The leaders that don't are going to look for blame. They're going to blame people. They're going to disregard their role in the whole mess, and they're going to protect themselves. I get real hot under the collar about people that lead that way.
And sadly, it's often the norm.
Yeah.
It really is.
This is a head scratcher, I guess, at the end of the day, is we know it's not sustainable. We know it's not how the majority of us want to be treated, right? Like, those leaders that act that way, they don't want to be treated that way themselves, even if they did experience that when they were coming up through the ranks. It's not what they wanted. I guarantee that. And it's not what any of the data or research shows us about what people crave in the workplace.
Yep.
So why do we keep doing it? Because it only gets results in the short term, not like long-term, sustainable, soulful outcomes.
I think I'm going to answer that specifically for me.
Okay. That's really the only thing we can do, right?
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that when I think about the team and how I lead the team and how I show up for the team, I think by default, I overcomplicate so much. Like, I think we have to have a million processes and a million procedures. And I think we have to have, all these, I'm gonna call them rules. They're not rules, but guidelines and all these things in place. And the more I really think about, like, you boil our business down to what do I want? What does Wayne want for the company? Like, what do I actually want? Well, I would like for the business to grow some. Like, I have realistic expectations. I don't need much growth, but like, I want to be on a growth trajectory, right? I don't want to be stagnant or declining. Number two, I want to make sure that we are serving our clients in two ways. Number one, we're serving them in such a way that we're getting results. So that's pretty important for what we do day in and out. Like, we're delivering measurable results for those clients. But number two, we're serving them in such a way that they view us as part of their team. In other words, we're integral into their businesses. And we're not just a third party vendor. We are involved in their business, and there's a relationship there, which in my definition involves sometimes some remarkable experiences tied in. Outside of those two or three things, right? They're all encompassed right there together. Like that's all I care about. Now, and I'm not saying I don't care about my team. The point is this: when we can get crystal clear about the few fundamental things that matter the most, and here's where I'm going with this. So, we live in a structure and a society where 40 hours is the norm, right? It's a 40-hour work week. Like that's the quote unquote golden rule, if you will. But if I really boil it down, like, do I care if my team works 40 hours a week? All my team is on salary. Do I actually care that they show up 40 hours a week? Do I care if they're here 35 hours a week? Do I care if they're here 42 hours a week? I mean, obviously if they're working way over, then that becomes an issue for work-life stuff. But I don't care if we're accomplishing these very basic things. And so for me, I'm kind of diverting here, but for me, I think the problem is I get so overwhelmed with all these other little things that it's so easy to lose sight on just the core few things and say, look, guys, you are smart, you're capable, you're here on the team. We've been working together all these years. Like, these are the things I care about. How we accomplish those things, I don't care. As long as it's within our values, as long as we're heading in the right direction. Like, if you want to take off every Wednesday afternoon, if you want to not come in at 8 o'clock every day, if you want to come in at not, you know what I mean? So I think for me, it's a lot of those are self-imposed, self-limiting beliefs that are partially by default just inherited from the society we live in here.
I agree with you, Wayne. I don't have enough enthusiasm, I think, in me for that, asking yourself regularly, what do I want for the company? That if more leaders could ask themselves that, whether it's the company, the team, the project, however granular they want to get, and if by asking that, if I want this, then how will I behave? If I want this, then what matters most in terms of actions, relationships, and outcomes? Because that's how you're setting those first expectations of people. So you're able to kind of constantly pull it back. And to your point, the 5-day a week, 40-hour work week, just as one example, is, well, if what I want is productive, engaged, healthy people, well, does this really matter? Or can I set an expectation that the outcomes are more important? And an outcome can be, you're in the office 3 days a week for this reason. I think the work week isn't necessarily the best example for this, but it's also one that we can kind of get our heads around. Because if what matters is the productivity, the product, the behavior, and the experience of my employees, then everything else should fall in order from that.
Yeah, and I think we engineer it instead of, I guess it was Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. Yes. Instead, what we do is we take societal expectations, we factor those things in, 40-hour work week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, 1 hour lunch breaks, whatever all those things may be. We factored those things in, and because we're trying to manage to those things, we lose sight of what matters most, which is the outcomes that we're seeking, why we exist and the mission that we're on. But because of this overlay, and I'm certainly guilty of that. I think in so many ways, the COVID experience broke so many of those molds very quickly. I mean, it was a default, but now we're falling back into what was true previously, right? There's a certain push to get back that direction.
Yes.
And I just think big picture wise that I'm speaking to myself here. Wayne, you overcomplicate things way too much. The things that matter most are getting crystal clear about what are those outcomes that we're after, making sure everyone is crystal clear on where we're going, what are the guidelines, the expectations to get there, and what's their role in that process of getting there. And that could vary from person to person. I think that's another issue, is that we always assume that it has to look exactly the same for every person.
Thank you. It does not. I treat you the same in terms of respect and like equitable behavior, but what works for you may not work for me.
And if we're speaking solely in terms of productivity here, we penalize people who are more productive by making them quote unquote punch a clock. Then somebody may need 40 hours a week, but your top performers may need 30 hours a week. And yet we penalize them because we have this notion that it's fair for everyone to do the 40-hour work week thing.
Yeah, fair is not fair at the end of the day. I believe that with my whole heart. And there will always be exceptions. There are certain jobs and environments that require high levels of standardization, but that's because the work demands it, not because the manager thinks it's easier. And that's one of the places I feel that leaders so often go wrong, is they don't start with what does the work require? What does the business demand of us in this space? We're going to do this work, that it needs to be done this way. Not because I want, but because that's actually what the work requires of us. And if you start with that, then everything else is going to be true. This is why I love talking about accountability, because at the end of the day, it's not punishment. It's the currency of how we get the work done. And it's about leading, it's about culture, it's about kind treatment of other people. If I could accomplish anything in my life, it would be that people would get excited when they hear accountability, as opposed to having that like gut clenching negative moment. Yeah. Because it just entails so much. Like, you can't talk about your mission, you can't talk about your vision, values, your culture without eventually ending up on accountability. And if you're going to have genuine accountability on your team, you have to constantly be tying it back to the big picture. This is something I could bore everyone I know talking about. I get oddly excited about it. What are some final thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think that I completely agree. And I love the phrase you just used, that accountability is the currency of, I would go as far as any healthy culture, whether it's business, whether it's family, like it's the currency. It's the medium of exchange, if you will, like you were saying. So I absolutely love that. And I think that for me as a leader, when I view accountability through that negative lens where I have to quote unquote hold my team accountable, it leads down a path of looking for what's wrong. It leads down a path of punishment, right? As opposed to, like we talked about earlier, as opposed to just natural consequences, things that show up because of certain behaviors, because we didn't live up to certain values or whatever that may be. So for me, it's just, the whole conversation I've thoroughly enjoyed, because like you, for me, this type of conversation has made all the difference, not just in my business, but in my personal life. So, I shared earlier how up until that event that my team was terrible, and post that event, my team was amazing, same team. And again, there was a process in that, but my personal life, not that I had a bad marriage or bad family life per se, but I worked a lot. 80-hour work weeks, and I'm not just throwing a number out there to say it was a legitimate 80+ hour work week every single week. I would work a normal day at the office. I would come home, spend an hour, hour and a half with the family, and then it was back on the computer working. It was working every weekend. And so what I would say is this, that this journey and this path, it's not just about what takes place in the workplace. Number one, if you're a leader listening to this, it's going to have a profound impact on you in your personal life. But number two, it's going to have a profound impact on the people that you get the privilege of leading. Because the people that I led prior, and some of them are still here actually, but the people that I led when it was a necessary evil, there was constant contention, right? I mean, it was a constant battle. No one enjoyed the battle. They didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it. Now today, it's the polar opposite. We thrive. Yes, we have conflict, but it's healthy conflict, and it's all those things. So it's just, I would say it's worth the work, right? Do the work to build the culture and the team that you want.
One of the things I think we lose sight of that's so important in this conversation is that when we talk about accountability in the workplace, when we talk about clear expectations, which is the kernel of accountability, we don't recognize that what it means for us is freedom. You've used one of my favorite terms, guardrails, around this. What guardrails give us is an understanding of where we can safely go. And that's what expectations and accountability do for us as well. So yeah, there is effort that goes into it. There's lack of assumption. There's feedback. There's, managing people. But at the end of the day, the clear expectation at the start, making the implicit explicit for folks, it frees you up so much, like mentally, emotionally, and temporally, that it's more than worth it. It's more than worth it. The cost definitely is less than the benefit.
Yep, 100%.
Wayne, I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you for coming along and letting me talk about accountability. I've learned from you. I really appreciate your time and all of your insight.
Thank you, Kate. I've enjoyed the conversation, and it's something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I hope to keep learning and growing in this area. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.